Rogue Planet, The Fate of the Cosmos. Chapter 1. The last chance the world had changed. It was no longer the same place that she had known growing up. Life was now a constant battle for survival. The air was polluted, the sun blotted out by thick black clouds, and the sky was an ominous shade of red. The oceans were acidic and the forests were dying. Humanity had pushed the planet too far, and now they were paying the price. Sarah had grown up in the last few decades of normalcy, but now she could hardly remember what life was like before the collapse. She was born in this new world, and everything she knew had been shaped by it. Her parents had told her stories of how life used to be, but it all seemed like a distant dream. She was a scavenger, one of the many people who roamed what was left of the world looking for anything of value. Sometimes it was food, sometimes it was technology, and sometimes it was just a piece of scrap metal that could be traded for something else. She was good at it, but it wasn't a life she had chosen. She had been given a chance, or rather, she had won a chance. There was a company that was running a competition, looking for a few people who could help them with a project. She had applied on a whim, never really expecting to hear back from them. But she had been chosen, along with a handful of others. They had been given a briefing on what the project was about, and she still couldn't quite believe it. They were going to build a ship that could travel beyond the solar system, to a planet that had been discovered not too far away. It was the last chance for humanity, a chance to start over somewhere new. Sarah had always dreamed of leaving this dying world behind, but she had never thought it was possible. Now, she was part of a team that was going to make it happen. It was an incredible opportunity, but also an incredibly daunting one. The odds were stacked against them, and the stakes were high. The team was made up of experts in various fields, people who had been recruited from all over the world. There were scientists, engineers, pilots, and more. It was an impressive group, and Sarah felt like the odd one out. She was just a scavenger, after all. But as the days went by, she started to find her place. She was good at finding things, which was a valuable skill on a project like this. She also had a knack for understanding how things worked, which helped her when it came to repairing or modifying equipment. She wasn't an expert in any one thing, but she was adaptable and resourceful. The ship they were building was enormous, a marvel of engineering. It was called the Nova, and it was designed to carry thousands of people, along with everything they would need to start a new civilization on the planet they were heading to. The ship had everything from hydroponic farms to advanced medical facilities, and everything in between. It was a self-contained ecosystem, capable of sustaining life for generations. The team worked around the clock, driven by a sense of urgency. They knew that time was running out, that the planet was on the brink of collapse. They had to finish the ship before it was too late. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself becoming more and more invested in the project. She had made friends among the team, people she respected and admired. They all had their own reasons for wanting to leave the planet behind, but they shared a common goal. The ship was nearly finished when disaster struck. There was a massive solar flare, and the ship was damaged beyond repair. It seemed like all their hard work had been for nothing. But the team refused to give up. They had come too far, and they had to find a way to make it work. They worked tirelessly, day and night, trying to salvage what they could from the wreckage. It was a Herculean task, but they were determined. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, they succeeded. The Nova was back on track, and they were ready to set sail for their new home. Sarah stood on the bridge of the ship, watching as the Earth receded in the distance. It was a bittersweet moment, leaving behind everything she had ever known. But she was also filled with hope and a sense of purpose. She was part of something greater than herself, part of a mission to save humanity. And that was something worth fighting for. Chapter 2. The crew. The Nova was a massive ship, and it took a lot of people to keep it running smoothly. The crew was made up of thousands of individuals, each with their own job and purpose. There were the scientists, who were responsible for researching and exploring the new planet. They were the ones who would be studying the flora and fauna, as well as the geology and climate. They would be looking for resources and assessing the planet's potential for sustaining human life. Then there were the engineers, who were responsible for maintaining and repairing the ship. They had to keep the systems running in tip-top shape, and make sure the ship could withstand the rigors of interstellar travel. The pilots were another important group, responsible for flying the ship through space. They had to navigate through asteroid fields and avoid any other dangers they might encounter. They were the ones who would be landing the ship on the new planet, and getting the colonists safely to their new home. And of course, there were the colonists themselves. These were the people who had left everything behind to start a new life on a new world. They were people from all corners of the earth, each with their own story and motivation for leaving. Sarah was amazed at the diversity of the crew. There were people of all races and nationalities, with all sorts of backgrounds and experiences. But they had all come together for a common cause, and that was what mattered. Despite the enormity of the task ahead of them, the crew seemed surprisingly cohesive. They had formed bonds quickly, often working together on projects or just spending time together in the ship's communal areas. There was a sense of camaraderie that seemed to transcend any differences they might have had. Sarah had made friends among the crew, people she could count on when things got tough. There was Max, the engineer who never seemed to sleep, always tinkering with some system or another. And there was Grace, the pilot who had a knack for calming nerves during tense moments. There were dozens more, each with their own unique qualities. But there were also tensions. It was inevitable when you put so many people together in such a confined space, with such high stakes. There were disagreements over everything from operational procedures to living quarters. Some people took their responsibilities more seriously than others, which could lead to conflicts. And there were always rumors circulating about who was doing what with whom, or who was hoarding supplies. Sarah tried to stay out of the drama as much as possible, but it was hard not to get sucked in. She found herself getting frustrated with some of her fellow crew members, and at times she felt overwhelmed with the responsibility they had been given. But she reminded herself of why they were here, and that ultimately they were all working towards the same goal. The journey through space was a long one, and it wasn't always easy. There were moments of boredom, as they traveled through seemingly endless stretches of nothingness. And there were moments of terror, when they encountered unexpected obstacles or malfunctions. But through it all, the crew persevered. They rallied together during crises, and celebrated together during successes. They were a family, in a way, bound together by their shared experiences and their mission. As they approached the new planet, anticipation was high. Everyone was anxious to see what lay ahead, to finally set foot on a new world. It was a momentous occasion, one that would be remembered for generations to come. And Sarah was proud to be a part of it all. She had helped build the ship that was taking them there, and now she was part of the crew that would build a new future. It was a daunting task, but one that she knew they were up to. Together, they were unstoppable. Chapter 3. The unknown horrors. The planet below them was a verdant paradise, the likes of which Sarah had never seen before. It was a world teeming with life, from the lush forests to the crystalline rivers. The sky was a vibrant shade of blue, and the sun shone bright and warm. But as the nova descended through the atmosphere and landed on the surface, Sarah felt a sense of unease. There was something off, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. As the crew began to explore the planet, they realized that it wasn't quite the paradise they had hoped for. There were dangers lurking around every corner, threats that they had never even imagined. For starters, there were the animals. They were unlike anything they had seen before, with bizarre physiologies and behaviors. There were animals that could camouflage themselves perfectly, animals that could mimic sounds to lure in prey, animals that could release toxic chemicals. Some of them were big and obvious, and others were small and insidious. Then there was the flora. The plant life on the planet was just as varied and dangerous as the animal life. There were trees that would try to ensnare anyone who got too close, flowers that could release hallucinogenic compounds, and vines that would wrap around limbs and never let go. The environment itself was also an issue. The weather patterns were unpredictable, with vicious storms rolling in without warning. There were swamps that would suck you down into the muck, and deserts where the temperature would rise to unbearable levels. And the planet's geology was also unstable, with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happening on a regular basis. But perhaps the most alarming thing about the planet was the inexplicable presence of something that seemed to be affecting the crew's minds. It started as subtle shifts in mood and behavior, but soon escalated to full-blown episodes of hallucinations and paranoia. At first, the crew assumed it was some sort of environmental factor that was affecting their brains. But as the effects grew worse, they started to consider the possibility that there was something else at play. It wasn't long before they realized that the planet was inhabited by an intelligent species. They couldn't see them or communicate with them, but they could sense that something was watching them. And whatever it was, it seemed to be messing with their heads. Sarah and a team of scientists set out to investigate. They armed themselves with scanners and other equipment in the hopes of getting some insight into what was happening. But as they trekked deeper into the jungle, things started to go horribly wrong. They were attacked by animals that seemed to be working in concert, forcing them off course and into unfamiliar territory. Equipment started malfunctioning, and communication with the rest of the crew was lost. And then, worst of all, they started to realize that something was following them. It was like nothing they had seen before, a creature that seemed to be a mix of plant and animal. It was towering, with vines and tendrils that snaked out like tentacles. And it seemed to be drawing closer. As they ran, Sarah and her team had to dodge obstacles and fight off smaller predators that seemed to have been sent after them. And all the while, they could hear the creature behind them, gaining ground. Finally, they reached a clearing, and the creature was upon them. It was massive, with a body that seemed to pulse with some sort of energy. Sarah couldn't even think of a way to fight it. But then something happened. The creature seemed to flicker for a moment, and then it was gone. Sarah looked around, confused, and saw that the trees and vines around them were pulsing with the same energy. It was then that they realized that the creature was some sort of collective entity, made up of all the plants in the area. And it was not happy with their presence on the planet. Sarah and her team barely made it back to the ship. They were battered and bruised, and some of them were still suffering from the effects of whatever was affecting their minds. They needed to regroup and come up with a plan, because it was clear that they were not alone on the planet. And the creatures that lived there were not friendly. Chapter 4. The sinister plan. The encounter with the plant creature had shaken the crew, but they knew they couldn't give up. They had come too far to let a little thing like a sentient jungle stop them. Sarah and the other scientists went over their data, trying to find some sort of explanation for what they had encountered. They wanted to understand the creature and figure out a way to protect themselves from it. But the more they studied, the more they realized that there were more mysteries on the planet than they had ever suspected. They discovered that the planet was not a natural occurrence, but a construct. Someone or something had created the world they were on, and with a purpose. There was evidence of some sort of advanced technology, things far beyond the capabilities of even the Nova. It was then that they realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. The planet was not just a new home for humanity, but a part of a larger plan. And whoever was behind it was not friendly. Their suspicions were confirmed when they intercepted a transmission. It was in a language they didn't recognize, but they could tell it was a warning. There was something coming, something dangerous. It wasn't long before they saw what that something was. It was a massive ship, larger than the Nova and bristling with weapons. It was clearly not friendly, and it was heading straight for them. The crew scrambled to prepare for an attack, but they knew they were outmatched. They had no weapons of their own, no way to defend themselves. All they could do was try to hide. And then, something unexpected happened. The planet itself seemed to come alive. The trees and plants started moving, their branches and vines weaving together to form barriers. The ground shook, and Sarah realized that there was some sort of network beneath the surface, a massive network of roots and tendrils that was coordinating the entire operation. The crew watched in awe as the planet seemed to come to their defense. The hostile ship fired upon them, but the barriers held. And then, as quickly as it had started, the attack was over. The other ship turned and fled, and the planet went quiet once again. It was then that they realized the truth. The planet's system was a weapon, a trap for whoever came near. They were on a planet that wasn't just dangerous, but actively hostile. And it seemed like someone, or something, was trying to keep them from leaving. Over the next few weeks, the crew scrambled to come up with a plan. They knew they couldn't stay on the planet indefinitely, but they also knew that they couldn't leave without a fight. They had to find a way to disable the weapon system, to free themselves from the sinister plan that had ensnared them. Sarah and her team worked tirelessly, poring over data and schematics. They knew they didn't have enough information, but they did have one advantage. They knew the language that the transmission had been in, and they had intercepted several more messages. They realized that the beings behind the operation were not from their own galaxy. They were extraterrestrial, and they were coming for them. The signals they had intercepted indicated that the planet was just one part of a larger operation, part of some diabolical plan that they couldn't even begin to fathom. But they did have one piece of information that could be useful. The transmissions had come with coordinates that they hoped would lead them to the central control system for the planet's weapons. They knew it was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Sarah and a team of volunteers set out to find the system. They journeyed through the dangerous terrain, dodging animals and avoiding traps. And finally, they found it. It was hidden away in a massive underground system, deep beneath the planet's surface. The control center was heavily guarded, and it was crawling with alien lifeforms that they had never seen before. But they knew they had to try. They launched a daring raid, fighting their way through the defenses and making their way to the core of the system. And then, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. The control system wasn't just controlling the planet's weapons, it was keeping the world itself alive. The system was the only thing holding the planet together, and if they shut it down, the planet would self-destruct. They had a choice to make, and it was a terrible one. They could shut down the weapons, and risk everyone on the planet dying. Or they could leave the system intact, and remain prisoners of whoever was behind the operation. Sarah knew what she had to do. She disabled the weapons, hoping that the planet would hold together long enough for them to get back to the Nova. And then she prayed that they would make it out alive. Chapter 5. The sacrifice. As the crew made their way back to the Nova, they knew that they were in a race against time. The planet was unstable, and they could feel the ground shaking beneath their feet. The weapon system was shut down, but they had no way of knowing how long the planet would remain intact. The crew moved as quickly as they could, running through the jungle and avoiding any obstacles in their way. But they were slowed down by the injured and the weak, and it quickly became clear that they wouldn't make it back in time. Sarah volunteered to stay behind. She knew it was a suicide mission, but she also knew that it was the only chance the rest of the crew had. If she could buy them enough time to get back to the Nova, maybe they could all make it out alive. It was a difficult decision, but Sarah knew it was the right one. She said goodbye to her friends, and watched as they disappeared into the dense foliage. And then she turned and headed back towards the control center. The ground was shaking more violently now, and Sarah struggled to keep her footing. The creatures on the planet seemed to sense that something was wrong, and they had become more aggressive. But Sarah pushed on, her eyes fixed on the control center. When she reached it, she saw that it was surrounded by aliens. They had clearly been alerted to her presence, and they were closing in fast. Sarah pulled out a makeshift weapon, a piece of metal that she had found on the way, and prepared to make her last stand. The aliens were closing in, and Sarah fought with everything she had. She took down one, then two, but more kept coming. And then, as desperation set in, she saw something that made her heart sink. The planet was falling apart. The ground was splitting open, and trees were being swallowed up by chasms. Sarah knew that she still had to complete her mission, but it seemed impossible. The aliens were relentless, and the planet was crumbling around her. It was in that moment that Sarah realized what she had to do. She had no chance of making it out alive, but maybe she could make the ultimate sacrifice. Maybe she could save the rest of the crew, and give them a chance to make it back to the Nova. And so, with a heavy heart, Sarah laid down her weapon. She held her hands up in surrender, knowing that it was the only way to get close to the control center. The aliens hesitated for a moment, then closed in. Sarah closed her eyes and braced herself for the end. She felt herself being surrounded, felt the aliens grabbing her arms and legs. And then, suddenly, the universe exploded in a blinding flash of light. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was standing in a completely different place. She was in a white room, surrounded by strange equipment and flashing lights. She couldn't even begin to guess what was happening. And then, slowly, it started to come together. She realized that she wasn't on the planet anymore, that she was somewhere else entirely. It was a ship, she realized, and as she looked around, she saw that she wasn't alone. There were other people there, people who looked even more confused than she was. They were people she didn't recognize, people who were clearly not part of the Nova's crew. Sarah didn't know what was happening or where she was. But she knew that she had made the ultimate sacrifice, that she had given everything to protect her crew. And she just hoped that they had made it out alive. Chapter 6. The Enemy Within. As Sarah tried to make sense of what had happened, she quickly realized that she was not alone on the ship. There were other people there, and they were all in the same boat. They were all confused, and they were all searching for answers. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and the others managed to piece together what had happened. They had all been taken from their respective ships, from their own crews, and brought together on this strange vessel. But no one knew who had taken them, or why. The ship seemed to be automated, with no visible crew or command center. But it was clearly heading in a specific direction, a direction that Sarah and the others couldn't determine. But as they dug deeper, they began to realize that they weren't alone on the ship. There was something else there, something that didn't belong. It started with small things, things that could have been explained away as malfunctions or glitches. But as time went on, the incidents grew more serious. Equipment started going missing. Navigation data was tampered with. And then, worst of all, alarms started going off in the middle of the night. There was something on the ship with them, something that was trying to stop them from finding out where they were going. Sarah and the others knew they had to act fast. They formed a team, a group of like-minded people who were willing to take the risks necessary to save themselves. They scoured the ship for clues, trying to find out where they were and who had taken them. And then, one day, they got their first break. They found a data drive hidden in a maintenance closet, a drive that contained information about the ship's owner. It was a shock to everyone when they realized who it was. The ship belonged to the same extraterrestrial beings that had created the dangerous world they had just escaped from. They still didn't know the reason behind their abduction, but they knew that they had to act fast if they wanted to survive. They worked together to decode the information on the drive, hoping to learn the motives of the aliens. They discovered that the aliens had taken them for one reason: experimentation. They wanted to study and examine their human subjects to see how they reacted to different environments and situations. Sarah and the others were disgusted by the revelation. But they didn't have much time to dwell on it. The alarm started going off again, and everyone knew that things were about to take a turn for the worst. The creature they had suspected was on the ship was finally making its presence known. It was a being unlike anything they had ever seen before, a creature whose form seemed to shift and change at will. It was intelligent, and it was determined to stop them from learning anything more about their captors. It set traps, lured them into dead ends, and caused chaos wherever it could. As the creature continued to chase them, Sarah and the others knew they had to take action. They had to find a way to stop it before it killed them all. Finally, they managed to corner it. They constructed a makeshift trap, and hoped that it would hold the creature long enough for them to figure out a way to defeat it. And then, as they watched in horror, the creature began to change. Its form shifted and blurred, and suddenly it was a human. It was someone they recognized, someone they had known before. They were stunned, and didn't know what to do. The person claimed they had been taken by the aliens as well, that they had no control over their own actions. But Sarah and the others didn't know if they could trust this former enemy. It wasn't until they found more evidence that proved the person's story was true, that they finally let their guard down. They realized that they truly were all in this together, and that they needed to work as a team if they wanted to survive. Their focus turned back to the aliens. They had to find a way to get out of their grasp, to escape the experiments and the captivity that they had been forced into. But they knew it wouldn't be easy, and they knew that there would be more challenges ahead. Chapter 7. The final battle. Sarah and the others didn't know how long they had been on the ship, but they knew it had been too long. They were growing restless, and they were determined to take action. They had been searching for a way to escape, but the ship was heavily guarded. They had tried hacking into the controls, but the systems were too complex to crack. They had tried to create distractions, but the aliens were too aware. They were running out of options, and they could feel the tension growing on the ship. The creature was still lurking, watching their every move, and they knew that they had to be careful. Finally, they were given an opportunity. The ship was approaching a planet that looked like it could sustain human life. They knew that this was their chance to finally get off this ship and start anew. They formulated a plan, a desperate plan. They knew it was risky, but they had to take it. They were going to storm the control room and take the ship for themselves. They were going to fight their way out. The plan went into action quickly. The group split up, taking different routes to the control room. They had improvised weapons, things they had found on the ship, and they moved fast, trying to catch the aliens off guard. It was a brutal fight, and Sarah and the others had to fight for every inch of space. But finally, they made it to the control room. They had taken down the guards, and they had control of the ship. They quickly set course for the nearby planet, hoping that they would make it there in time. But they knew that the aliens weren't going to let them go without a fight. They had alerted other ships, other crews, and they were swarming the area. Sarah and the others knew that they had to defend their newfound freedom. They took up positions on the ship, ready to fight. The battle was intense, with ships flying everywhere and lasers lighting up the darkness of space. But Sarah and the others fought with everything they had. They had been through too much, endured too much, to give up now. The enemy ships were coming in hard and fast, but they managed to hold their ground. They fought off the waves of ships that came at them, one after another. And then, just as it seemed like they were going to be overrun, a miracle happened. The Nova appeared, coming out of nowhere and joining the battle. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. She had thought for sure that the Nova had been lost, that they had never made it off the dangerous planet. But there they were, blasting into the battle and taking the aliens by surprise. The situation quickly turned in their favor. The Nova had weapons that could truly make a difference in the fight. They fought together, the crew of the Nova and the crew of the alien ship fighting side by side, pushing the aliens back. It was a fierce and brutal battle, but finally, it was over. The aliens were defeated, and Sarah and the others were free. The crew of the Nova welcomed them aboard, offering them food, water, and medical attention. They were finally safe, and finally heading home. Sarah knew that they had been through hell, but she also knew that they had come out on the other side. They had survived the dangers of space, the perils of the unknown, and they had done it together. As the Nova powered up its engines and headed back to humanity's home planet, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She knew that she had found a new family in the crew of the alien ship, and that they had come through the toughest of trials together.